Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, and today I'm going to do a kind of a short video on a stupid subject, but first I wanted to say, in case anybody hasn't seen I'm doing a lot of community posts now on YouTube, but some people might not see them, I don't know. Make sure you hit the notification bell if you've subscribed to me so you don't miss those posts, many of which feature pictures of meatballs, so don't miss them. But I wanted to thank absolutely everybody who posted to Twitter calling for my reinstatement. And it turns out that it has worked out because we had, I did one last appeal and it suddenly got reversed. And I can tell you, I mean, it was a bit of magic, but mostly I think it was based on just how many people spoke up, because in the appeal, I did a total of 4 appeals, right? And the first 3 were the first couple were rejected rather quickly. The third one was rejected almost immediately after sending it, which indicated that it was just a bot or something that was just summarily denying, right? And then I did the 4th appeal, which I literally just cut and paste the 3rd one. And what I had mentioned in there, of course, was that if they searched for my name, they would be able to see a large number of people pointing out exactly what I was arguing in the appeal, which was that that it was a misinterpretation, what I posted that they had banned me for. And this time it worked out. After a bit of time, they came back to me and fully reinstated me. So I'm back on Twitter, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop my commitment to being more active on YouTube than I was before. Because again, I recognize that it's you guys who follow me on YouTube, who supported me on YouTube, that are the people I should be most focused on caring about. Okay? So today I'm going to talk about a new product coming out by Modivius Press, who have made a large number of games. One of the ones that they've done is Achtung Cthulhu, which I once reviewed. I don't remember if it was a video review or if it was still back when I was doing my blog. It might have been a written review. But anyways, regardless, at the time I felt it was a pretty good product. There was World War II era Cthulhu play. And they have now made a new game called Cohors Cthulhu, which is set. It's explicitly a historical setting game, just like Achtung Cthulhu was set in World War II in our real world. Cohors Cthulhu is set in the 2nd century in the Roman Empire in our real world. And they have gotten into quite a bit of controversy because this book obviously has, NPCs, characters in it, and so on and so forth. And Modivius has decided that in the case of every NPC, they're putting the pronouns of these characters. Now, this is patently ridiculous. And, I've seen people complaining about it all over Twitter. And Modivius responded by saying, oh, well, if you're saying this, it's because, I don't know, you're an uncaring person or you have a problem with trans people or something like that. And we're going to double down. Like I don't know if they said literally double. Hey, it's Meatball. Meatball was just outside having some fun. I've just finished my DCC game, and Meatball comes in and out during the game because the door is open. But I guess she's back inside now that everybody's gone. So what I was saying is that whether or not they said it literally, they literally said, we're going to just put even more pronouns just to teach you guys. It's just, they think they're lecturing to us or something. It's patently ridiculous. And let me explain why it's really ridiculous from a historical point of view. Because there are some people saying, well, this is just ridiculous because this is, an ancient history that people didn't use pronouns. And that's true, right? But it goes kind of beyond that, right? Their argument is, well, there were people back then who were non-binary. There were people there who were trans. There were people there who were, whatever other gender categories you want to talk about. There were queer people in the Roman Empire. But now here's the thing, right? it's certainly true that throughout all of human history in all kinds of different cultures, there have been all kinds of different conceptions of gender. And in a lot of cultures, that means that, first of all, there, to some degree, although there are certain gender roles that have been like fairly immutable throughout all of human history and all different human cultures, there are also a lot of areas which are malleable, right? And so there are some places where certain things that maybe in our society or in our society up until recently were thought of as masculine traits in our society. In another society, some of those might be seen as feminine traits. And some things that we think of as feminine traits or behaviors or activities might have been seen as masculine traits or behavior or activities in different places, right? So, for example, in the Roman Empire, women were the ones who managed family money. That was seen as a woman's job, right? Which is something that, we could say not nowadays maybe, but back in, let's say, the better part of the 20th century, it was more common for that to be seen as the husband's job, right? It was to manage the money. But that's not a universal trait. That's a cultural trait, And so some of these varied. But beyond that, there was also many cultures who had the conception of what historians would have tended, at least recently, to call a third gender, right? Which is to say that there are many cultures that have males, females, and something intermediate. But the thing is, that conception of that something intermediate, has always had cultural connotations that are unique from one culture to another. And so this is the problem. The current collection of genders and sexualities, in fact, because it's not just gender, it's also sexuality, right? So, the definition of somebody being gay in our culture is not the same as it would have been in other cultures. There are contexts to this, right? So, for example, in the Roman Empire, if for someone to be gay in the passive role was different than someone engaging in homosexual acts in the active role for the pagan period of the Roman Empire, at least. Those were seen as two very different things with two very different social connotations, right? So that essentially somebody who engaged in active homosexuality, right? They were the pitcher, not the catcher, so to say, was not really seen as gay at all. Whereas someone who is the receptive partner in a male homosexual activity, that was seen as something. The word wouldn't have been gay, right? But it had connotations to it, right? And it was seen at least as something that was often used as a context of social mockery, right? In that culture, because it was seen as feminizing in certain ways. That's very different than the general concept of homosexuality in modern Western culture up to, before, let's say, the sexual revolution, where it didn't matter which of the two parts you played, that would still label you as a homosexual, right? Or as engaging in homosexual activity, at least, right? So that was a difference, And then, of course, there were many cultures where there were contexts in which men would dress as women, and some cultures where women would dress as men, and then they would no longer be seen as absolutely as a woman or a man. Usually they wouldn't be seen as the thing that they were as the gender that they were dressing as opposed to their biological sex, but they would rather be seen as a third category, right? For example, in India, there was quite a lot of that sort of thing throughout different historical periods and historical contexts. So that's why, for example, in Arrows of Indra, there are the Kliba who are a third gender group, and those are included in my game because that's historical. What wouldn't be historical is to say, well, oh yeah, there's an LGBTQ plus two-spirited spectrum in the Bharata kingdom period of mythical India, right? That would not make sense. That is just trying to rip something out. Like they're pretending like this idea of naming your pronouns is something that has existed for all of human history and isn't something that was invented in 2014 in Tumblr, which is really the source of, the source of all all of the wild directions in which a lot of our current discussions on sex and gender have spawned, right? Which is a problem because, you know, like that it's generally been Tumblr has been a source of all kinds of perverse things that you know, it's not really where we should be taking our mark from, right? And it's not, and again, this is not to criticize people who are gay or even people who are trans or have gender dysphoria or who have, you know, issues of identifying just as a man or as a woman based on their biological sex. I'm not saying that that's not real or that they're not, you know, not a real thing that they are feeling or that it should in some way not be allowed, right? What I am saying is that the categories that we use are entirely arbitrary and unique to our society. You can have a completely different set of categories for people in a different society. And in fact, you would in almost every society. They've had different categories. Some of them look similar to some of other societies, but none of them are quite the same because this is all actually a form of social cultural classification of sexual and gender roles and sexual and gender behaviors. It's not something that is, let's say, a scientific categorization. That's nonsense. This isn't science, right? This is social engineering of different kinds, right? And if our society was different, we could do it a different way. And some could argue that there would be it would be a lot wiser not to try to create these boxed-in categories of 52 different genders or however many there are, but rather to say, okay, there is, you know, somebody who is traditional heterosexual male who is, you know, born as a biological male, traditional heterosexual woman who was born as a biological female. And then there's a third category. That third category can be kind of open, right? Because actually the only thing this does is it like continues to create this balkanization of gender categories that I don't think serves anyone. It doesn't serve the people. That like does trying to invent a new gender and then have some people identify, does that really help anyone, right? Like it would be a lot better if we just said, okay, yeah, there's basically three categories, you know, and you know, there's let's say the standard normative male, standard normative female, and then there's intermediate, right? And we can discuss, you know, types of toleration and acceptance of intermediate people without necessarily saying that we have to now create a whole new language, which is largely being used as a tool of kind of a political tool of forced loyalty oath, right? Of a kind of a loyalty oath of acceptance that I think has not served well for the LGBTQ plus community, because the more that it is trying to be imposed, the more that actually it has been, I mean, this has been proven in polling, right? It has actually made a backwards movement, a turn from the peak period of when people were accepting of gays and lesbians and of you know, people with alternative sexualities. That from that time, for the last 10 years or so, opinion has actually been turning the other way around. It's been turning against, public opinion has been turning against people because of this, you know. And part of it is stuff like this, is trying to rewrite history to say that these are actually objective terms that would have been used anywhere in history and in any time, right? And that we need to apply completely anachronistically the standards as if the 2nd century Roman Empire was like 2023 Seattle, you know, like trying to impose this. And it's one thing if you're doing this on a game that is, you know, a fantasy world, right? Because theoretically, I don't know, the Forgotten Realms, you know, you can still say it's silly that Waterdeep looks like and acts like 2023 Seattle and has, you know, pride parades and stuff like that in Waterdeep. But that's a fantasy world, right? So in theory, anything can happen in a fantasy world. And there the only problem becomes kind of a problem of suspension of disbelief, which could still be a problem, right? Because if something seems too silly in the context of the rest of the world, it can still cause an issue in terms of the gameability of that world. But if you're trying to apply it to a historical setting, then why not use the structures that are in that historical setting? Like I said, the Roman Empire had concepts of intermediary genders, and it had its own concepts of same-sex relationships. It had those things. So why not do the damn research and base it on that instead of trying to just say, no, we have to impose 2023 values on the 2nd century, on the 2nd century Roman Empire, which is just ridiculous. And the ability for them to just say, no, you guys are just all bigots, that's actually working against the product, because that accusation isn't going to help them win hearts and minds or customers, So what are you doing, Modifius? You've done this completely wrong. And I can say this as someone who I think has done things pretty right when it comes to historical settings. I have had, first of all, in fantasy settings, the World of the Last Sun has characters, it's a Gonzo fantasy world. It really anything goes, and it's got characters and entire organizations that, have to do with alternative gender roles or sexualities or things like that, right? The Order of the Azure Wizards, they're heroic characters that are all wizards who have specifically got often magical reasons for being of intermediate gender, let's say. In Arrows of Indra, I have very prominently included the intermediate gender categories that were appropriate to Vedic era India. And so that is something that is historical. And then after that, what people do with it individually, if you want to run Arrows of Indra game and not include that, all right, that's going to be the decision of the DM at the table, right? But at least there, what you have is you have the accurate information, right? And so someone who's complaining about it, my response as the writer of that book is to say, look, this isn't an endorsement of anything in the modern age. It's not a rejection of anything in the modern age. It's me presenting history as what it actually was. And that's the point. That's what I'm trying to do there. I'm presenting it as the society as it would have been in actual history. And I do that in some degree. Obviously, in medieval Europe, things were different there, and there was quite less. There certainly wasn't any open categories of anything like that. But I have mentioned there are characters that I mention in Dark Albion and some of the adventures in the Medieval Companion 2, where I make it clear that there are people who have same-sex relationships and things like that, that are, and there are some of them that might be bad guys, there are some of them that might be good guys. Most characters in these settings are not either paragons of goodness or paragons of evil, right? Human beings are usually something in between, right? And so you have a variety of characters. And I'm not doing it to send some kind of a political or social message. I'm doing it because this is historically realistic, right? And so it's not something that appears in huge amounts in most of it, but it does appear there from time to time, and that's fine. That's how it should be. But it also means that I'm not engaging in any kind of failure to represent anything. I am historically representing how things would have historically been. And that's that. If Modifius had done that, if instead of putting 21st century Tumblr pronouns on their characters, they had actually bothered to do the work, then people would have much less vantage point from which to argue. Except, of course, Modifius didn't want to do that. What Modifius wanted to do was make a modern day social commentary that they're imposing on a product. So it's completely legitimate to criticize it as it being essentially a kind of propaganda. And there you go. So I'm sorry to disappoint you if you're Modifius fans. They did Conan up to recently where they've lost, I don't know if they lost or just gave up the license. And, now they're doing this and, and they're not looking to back down on it. So there you have it. Anyways, tell me what you think in the comments. Share the video, anywhere you think people will be interested in it or will, get pissed off by it. I can see, obviously, certainly some of the woke people getting pissed off at this. How dare I bring up actual historical data and do it in a way that's actually not negating the existence of people who have alternative sexualities or gender identities, but at the same time pointing out, this is the crime, is pointing out that the gender identities and sexuality categories we have in our modern era are not some absolute scientific truth. They're just a cultural invention. That's what they are. They're a particular categorization, which isn't to say that it's an invention that there are people who are attracted to the same sex, or that there are people who have a non-standard gender identity, but the categories that we create are completely arbitrary. They're socially determined. They didn't exist in other cultures in the same way. There were other categories, and they could have done the research. So share this anywhere. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Check out the channel. Hit the notification button. Hit the like button on the video, and check out my products. If you want to see, in my products, I certainly do not go around making a political showboating of it, but like I said, I don't ignore anything that's in history. I put it in there, and then the DM is free to do what he wants with it. And I also have the same rule. World of the Last Sun is not a real setting in any way, but not a historical setting in any way. But I do the same rule there because there are human societies there, or humanoid societies, and they're going to have the same issues. So, but I'm not going to recreate, 2 billion years in the future, which is more or less when World of the Last Sun is set. You're not going to have the same gender categories we have in 2023 North America. That people are going to have different perspectives on these things. And that's the way to do it. So check out all my products: World of the Last Sun, the Gonzo Fantasy Companion, Social Encounters on the Silk Road, Star Adventurer, and Arrows of Indra, since I mentioned it. And all my other products. You can find the links in the description of this video or any of my videos where you can pick them up. And you will get games that are set up to create games, and worlds and setting material and adventures that are for the purpose of making as good of a world as possible, like not morally good, but rather as well designed of a world as possible, and as interesting as possible, and as playable as possible, and not focused on pushing any kind of agenda. My games aren't woke, and they aren't anti-woke. My games are made to be games, and that's how everybody should do it, right? Like, as soon as you're putting in political propaganda into a game, it doesn't make the game, it doesn't make the propaganda better. It just makes the game worse. That's all you're accomplishing there. So if you don't like that sort of stuff, then check out my games. And, when you do so, you're supporting me, and you're also getting something for yourself, because my games are highly playable. There's material in them. You can take them and use them in your own OSR or D&D games, or you can play them entirely as they are, and you won't be disappointed. So be sure to check all that out. Check out my RPG Pundit Presents series. There's more stuff to come. RPG Pundit Presents number 108 has just come out, which is even weirder Gonzo organizations. Check that out if you're interested in descriptions of various secret groups that are that are portable into any kind of really weird fantasy world, or if you want to weird up your slightly weird fantasy world. And there's more to come. Very soon we're going to have Wilderlands for the Silk Road. So another source book for Sword and Caravan. That's coming probably by the end of the month at the latest. So keep your eyes open. And again, share the video everywhere. Thank you so much to everyone. Especially, again, thank you to everybody who made a statement for me on Twitter. It's good to be back. But keep watching this channel. Currently smoking Stanwell Deluxe plus Argento Roots.